Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tips. My name is Julian and we're continuing my series of episodes that I've been making about each individual NHL team, their noteworthy players, and if I think that you should consider drafting them. Today's episode is about the Columbus Blue Jackets. They're another one of the few teams that I actually don't have a jersey for, so I have this beautiful 2009 100-year Habs jersey right behind me. Before we get started in the content though, guys, please leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell if you want notifications for all of my preseason content. Let's jump into it now. Let's start with the projected lines that I see Columbus having this year. On the top line, I think it's going to be Gaudreau, Jenner, and Patrik Laine. On the second line, Kent Johnson, Cole Sillinger, and Jakub Voracek. And on the third line, Nyquist, Roslovic, and Chinakhov. So jumping into their noteworthy players, and first on the list is Johnny Gaudreau. Last year had an amazing season, scoring 115 points overall and just being an unbelievable talent in the league. Was the 14th best fantasy player in terms of fantasy points per game. And this year his ADP in Yahoo is 19.9. So he's being drafted around 20th overall. Now the big difference between Gaudreau last year and Gaudreau this year is he's now playing on a new team. This year, he's not playing with guys like Elvis Merzlikins and Matthew Tkachuk. Like I showed you before, he's probably going to play with Jenner and with Patrik Laine, which is not bad line mates at all. But Elvis Merzlikins and Matthew Tkachuk are definitely better line mates. So I don't expect Gaudreau to have quite as explosive as the season this year. And that's why I think drafting him at around 20th overall is pretty early. I think NHL's list had it more correct, ranking him around 39. Now, do I think he's a terrible pick around 20 overall? No, I don't think it's a terrible pick, but I think that it's a little bit early. Another reason I think that is last year he was a plus 64, which is definitely something that he's not going to be able to replicate, especially not in Columbus. And that's something that really increased his fantasy value last year, and he's not going to have that this year. So that's another thing that's just, I don't see Gaudreau being ranked around number 20 overall this year. Just not going to happen. Again, NHL definitely had it more right around the 40 range, maybe even the 50 range. Then I have Patrik Laine. Currently has an ADP of 85.6. Had a nice season last year with 56 points in 56 games. You know, he missed a little bit of time. But he was the 66th best player in terms of fantasy points per game, which is really freaking good. And he shot the puck a lot, about 3 times per game, which is pretty good. He was 50th in the league in shots on goal per game, which is very, very good. Now, Laine, if he does play with Gaudreau this year, can only get better. And last year, like I said, he was 66th in terms of fantasy points per game, and he's being ranked lower than that with an ADP of around 86. So Laine could be a real steal around this point in the draft. Definitely like drafting him around here. Then I have Werenski, who had himself a pretty decent season last year with 48 points in 68 games, with a decent amount of shots on goal and a decent amount of blocks. I remember there was a game last year where he had 10 shots on goal in a single game. Werenski is definitely someone who's definitely not a bad fantasy player at all. And last year he finished as the 126th best player in terms of fantasy points per game, and this year he's being drafted around 97th overall, which is a little bit earlier than his rank from last year. However, Johnny Gaudreau is on the team this year and should improve that power play a little bit, and Werenski is definitely going to be the guy manning that top power play. And I think he's going to end up being a little bit better this year, and I don't think a ranking of around 100 is bad for Werenski. He's one of the better defensemen in fantasy. Then I have Boone Jenner, who NHL.com ranks at 153, and in Yahoo he's going at 168.9 right now, which is very, very late. But get this, guys, last year he was the 90th best player in terms of fantasy points per game, which is a lot higher. And last year he wasn't playing with Johnny Gaudreau, so Boone Jenner could seriously be a real steal this year because his point production could go even higher playing with a guy like Johnny Gaudreau. Definitely like that. And he's someone that puts up some really solid peripherals too. Shoots the puck a really, really nice amount and even hits and blocks a little bit. So in categories leagues, Boone Jenner really fills up that stat sheet, and he's definitely a great value at his current draft price. Then I have Adam Boqvist. Missed a little bit of time last year, but ended up with 22 points in 52 games. Look at that shooting percentage, though. His shooting percentage is 17.2, which is insanely high for a defenseman. Defensemen very rarely hit above 7% shooting percentage, so that is very, very high, and he's not going to be able to sustain that last year. So those 11 goals in 52 games, he's not going to be able to do that again. And as it is, his point totals weren't that great. He's not going to be getting top power play unless Werenski gets injured, and I just really don't like Adam Boqvist at this range at all, and he's being drafted even earlier than this. I'm staying away from him in fantasy this year. Then I have Elvis Merzlikins, who NHL ranks as the 208th best fantasy player, and I absolutely love him in this range. He's going a little bit earlier in Yahoo drafts currently with an ADP of 154, but he's still the 28th goalie off the board in Yahoo drafts, which is absolutely insane. Merzlikins has a lot of value in fantasy because, well, he's the starting goalie in Columbus and doesn't have much competition. Korpisalo is not a good goalie, and that's why Merzlikins is one of my favorite draft steals of this preseason, especially in points-based leagues where you just need goalie starts and decent performances to get points. Merzlikins is someone that I definitely like. In categories league, I don't love him quite as much, but I think he's still going to do pretty decent for you. Then I got Cole Sillinger and Kent Johnson, who NHL.com has ranked at 210 and 247th overall. Now, Sillinger last year finished as the 388th best fantasy player per game and points per game. However, he was 18 years old last year, and to do that well as an 18-year-old is pretty good. And I think this year he's going to be even better. He may get that second line center role, and if he does and ends up playing with Kent Johnson and Jakub Voracek or something like that, he could see a pretty decent fantasy season. Now, he doesn't currently have an ADP in Yahoo League, so you don't necessarily have to draft this guy, and honestly, he's locked in at center, so he's not someone that I personally would draft. But if the season starts and you see that he's performing really, really well, and for some reason you need a center on your team, he's someone that you can consider grabbing. And same kind of thing with Kent Johnson. He's not someone you necessarily have to draft in the draft, unless you want to throw a very, very late round pick at him. He is going to be a very solid rookie, I think, this year, and he showed how good he can be in those World Junior Championships. He's not someone you have to draft, though, and if you see that he's starting to do well at the beginning of the season, he's someone that you can pick up. Then I have Jakub Voracek, who NHL does not have ranked in their top 250 players. And if he does fall outside the top 250 players, he's a pretty okay draft pick, because last year he ended up finishing as the 238th best fantasy player in terms of fantasy points per game. Which is a little bit strange because you see he actually scored 62 points last year, but he doesn't score a lot of goals, right? He only scored 6 goals, the rest were assists. So yeah, that's nice, but you do need goals to make yourself more valuable in fantasy. Now, in Yahoo, he's currently going at an average ADP of 163.8, which to me is just way too high. He didn't hit a value anywhere near that last year. So unless he plays with Gaudreau, and even if he does, he probably does not hit that value. And that's why I would avoid Jakub Voracek, where he's currently being drafted at 163. Now, there are other guys like Roslovic and Nyquist that could potentially have a little bit of fantasy value if they're deployed in the top 6. But as of right now, I'm not super high on them, and I'm not drafting them. And that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. Please leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell if you want notifications for all of my preseason content. Until next time, guys, I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.